Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this day one of the OnlineTestConf fall 2018. I'm joined here by Brendan Connolly. Brendan, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Excellent. So now would be a great time to basically grab the screen and start your presentation if you want.
Okay.
Just a short intro about Brendan. Brendan is a software design engineering test based out of Santa Barbara, California. That's in the US for all the rest of you who are still trying to locate that. We do have people from all over the world. He has been testing for over 10 years in experience in quite a lot of different roles. And yes, we can actually see your screen. And he writes tests from all levels, from unit testing to integrations, API, UI test. And right now he's responsible for creating and executing testing strategies in his company. Actually, before this talk, I went over to his blog, brendanconnolly.net, and I recommend going over the articles. They were actually pretty nice. And today, Brendan will be talking about his manual regression testing manifesto. So, Brendan, take it from here.
All right. Well, as Joel was saying, I'm Brendan Connolly. I am a senior quality engineer at Procore Technologies. We build the software that builds the world. We build construction management software in a small city outside of LA. I call myself a senior quality engineer. I drop the assurance because I'm not quite sure what I would assure. Plus, it sounds like I give myself a compliment and make other people give me compliments when they announce my title, because I'm a quality engineer. So what do testers do at release time? And I love this picture of Thor, and it kind of gives you this sense of all that we go through, building up to the release, getting ready to ship it off to our customers, the internal battles that we face, and we're kind of excited and we're kind of scared. But what does that all mean, right? So what we actually do during release time is regression. Well, what is regression? How many people are really comfortable defining regression testing and what it is? Is it just something you automate? Because not every single context supports automating regression testing, or some of your tests for automation there may not be worthwhile. They might not have the real ROI that would justify the time spent managing them. Oops, sorry. So regression is a movement backward to a previous, and especially worse, or more primitive state or condition. I think it's important to remember that I like the primitive state part. Right? It can be a changing back. We are reverting back to previous behavior. It may not necessarily be a bug. It might be that changes that we've made previously have been undone. But does your team understand all that? Do they know what it means to regression test? How many people get asked, are you going to test everything? Right? Or where are we with all the testing? I think there's a pretty solid gap of understanding where what testers do and what management often thinks we do during regression time. You will be asked if everything has been tested. And we've seen this kind of communication breakdown in the past. When there was waterfall software development, and maybe not everybody here has been through that. I'm kind of showing my age and experience in the field. But there was this thing called waterfall software development. And it was terrible, right? We spent all this time designing things, talking about them. It had to be fully developed, and then it was handed off to the tester. And there may be contexts where that still is viable. But what we came to see with all these problems is that we needed to change. And to drive that change, a group of software developers got together, they met up in a room, and they created the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And this is something that has driven all of our lives forward, especially as testers, right? This has drawn us into the conversation. But out of this manifesto came core values and principles that drive our software development practices today. And it's individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. I think these are things we can all recognize and resonate with us today. And it's not that the things on the left are all that we value, right? We just value them more than the things on the right. So to drive this change, we need a regression testing manifesto to help us communicate why we need to change and what we are doing to help us start a conversation with our teams. So draw people into testing. As we move towards DevOps, we no longer have the luxury of being the only people doing testing. And it's a rarity these days. We just don't have the time. We need to draw people in, become quality influencers. So to do that, we want a manifesto. And our first core value for our manifesto is behavior over bugs. So let's take a look at the definitions for both of these words and kind of shape this idea. So what's a bug? A bug is an unexpected defect, a fault, a flaw, or an imperfection. This is kind of what people often think is the currency of testers, right? This is how we show value. This is how we show we were present on our teams. This is sometimes a merit badge that we can hold up to our team to show what we've brought and given to them. So, but for regression testing, why would we not want to look for bugs, right? If this is the currency of testing, this is how we are measured. This is our primary artifact from testing. Why wouldn't we want to be looking for bugs during regression time? Well, quality software isn't bug-free software. There's plenty of software that we use every day that has bugs. It might be riddled with bugs, right? Maybe you see them and maybe you don't, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's quality software because it's lacking bugs, right? But the opposite is also true. Bug-free software isn't necessarily quality software either. If it doesn't solve your needs, if it doesn't address the customer base, if it doesn't work in a way that works for you, is it really a quality solution? The other side of this is consider when we are doing regression testing. So just finding a bug doesn't warrant its resolution. I think we've all seen that as testers, right? How many times have you had to argue for a bug to be resolved, to prove its relevance, to prove its impact on customers, to have the conversations about why this bug warrants time, money, and effort above other things to be resolved. So what are we looking for instead of this? We want to focus on behavior. What's behavior? Behavior is the way in which something functions or operates. So I like to think of behavior of the software as its personality. Because there's lots of different apps that do the same thing. I mean, people use Uber or Lyft, right? But those are different, they solve the same problem, but they're different solutions, right? And you choose which one you like and which one you primarily use because it fits with what you like, with your personality, how you perceive that solution needing to be fixed, or your personal values. So it's how your software does it. What this allows us to think about is it gives us this idea that bugs are just personality flaws with our software. Now, some personalities have flaws that are deal breakers, right? Things where you don't want to be friends with that person or you don't want to work with that person. Some are just mild frustrations. Maybe the app doesn't have a workflow that you like best. Maybe there's other things you could do. Maybe it's not on the platform that you like. Or maybe you just don't even notice it. I think there's been plenty of times where testers find a bug and it ships and it's not reported by our customers. They either don't notice it or it doesn't matter to them. And what this really leads us to is that these are boundaries of trust. Now, this is an online conference, so they may not be traveling to the destination. But if you've gone on a work trip with coworkers, maybe an in-person conference, sometimes you're uncomfortable, right? Because you're blending and stretching the boundaries of your relationship. Would you party with that software or you're that person? Right? We are stretching this. People rely upon our software every day to make business decisions to help drive their processes, their day-to-day. Can they rely on you? Can they trust you? When things go wrong, is it there to help them? Now, it's also important to recognize that the role of your software matters. Now, the easy example is always medical devices where life and death comes into testing and how serious the impact bugs can have. And the other side is like iPhone apps, something small, there's non-critical, but there's a ton of room in between those 2 points. And understanding what your customers are looking for, how you're trying to solve that problem is much more valuable when it comes to release time than any bug you're going to find. We want to make sure that our customers look forward to releases. Does anybody have apps on their phone where they cringe a little bit when they see that there's an update because they don't know what's going to happen next? They don't trust that update. That's the last thing you want. I'd rather have a bug and still have be able to use the software. A small, So it's important to understand how you resolve your customers' problems. Understand the behavior, how your customers are looking for this problem to be solved, rather than any number of bugs you might find. Wrapping this into regression testing, these are well-worn paths that we're supposed to be going through in regression testing. We aren't rediscovering the software and how it's supposed to work. And if you consider who's actually tasked with regression testing, you might say dumped on them or offloaded onto them. It's usually people that are junior or newer to your team. It's a learning opportunity, right? It's how you get spun for what people often think is tedious or things that maybe we just do because we have to. But what that really means is there's this huge opportunity for people while learning to mistake existing bugs that aren't regressions with problems that are related to the release. And the last thing you really want to do is spend a bunch of developers' time or products person's time rehashing issues that have already been identified and have been ignored. Maybe they existed 5 years ago, but you're rediscovering them because you think you're an expert now because you're going through, how come somebody didn't catch this before? Well, it's because they did, and it wasn't priority. And maybe it was so low a priority for them and the management team that it wasn't even worth logging a bug, so you don't even need to see if it's in Jira. So when you start regression testing, what version do you test on? Everybody I know jumps right to testing on the latest software. We want to make sure the newest is working. We want to get it out. Well, for learning, how do you know what your baseline is if you're testing on the latest? Because then what you end up doing is time traveling. You jump to the future, what's going to be released, you test it, you see a problem, then you have to jump backwards in time, verify, does this behavior still happening on that previous release? If you're new to software, or the software you're testing, or even in general, it's a good idea to start your testing on the existing version, the released version of your software. Then when you can get an idea of how things work, because how often when you go back to retest things, you don't remember every single detail about things. And maybe you thought it was a bug before, but you don't remember it. And you rediscover the same bug you found before, and you go down the whole rabbit hole again. If we can set a solid baseline in our minds to quickly test things, we avoid that rediscovery loop, right? We're just actually setting a foundation so we can verify things aren't regressing on the latest version. So our next core value is intent over implementation. What's implementation? Implementation is the process of putting a decision or plan into effect. It's its execution. So why not implementation? Implementation is the cloud provider you're on. It's the database type you're on. It's the design decisions that you've already made. Is it a radio button? Is it a drop-down? Those types of things. Once those decisions have been made, they've already been established. We don't need to go down. The details there should have been tested at feature time. And what we really want to look to do is decouple the wants of our customers from the way we chose to construct it. Because if we go down the path of saying reusing feature testing for regression testing, following those same steps, what we end up with is this overfocus on detail. And you see this in people's test cases. And I know everybody loves test cases. Everybody wants them. It makes people feel comfortable. But the more detail you add, the more complex it is to understand. And we end up writing these poems and these odes to implementation, right? How do I love thee? How do I test thee? Let me document the steps. Right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to understand each step along the way and what you're actually looking for. How easy is it to say pass on a step where you don't really understand what it's doing? And there's this implicit bias that makes you, as a newer person, want to make those steps succeed. So instead, if you focus on something else rather than the details, you can be more apt to discover things in regression testing that you're actually looking for. And what is that? We want to focus on the product's intent. And intent is the state of mind with which an act is done. It's volition. Now, volition is a nice word. Let's take a little bit deeper here. Volition is the power of choosing or determining. So that choice, those determinations, were based on how your team was structured, what skill sets were available to best solve the problem the way that your company wanted to address it, right? So when we look to regression test, we want to value the user needs over our technical choices, because implementation is just the method in which we satisfy the intent of our software. And there's this temptation while regression testing to kind of use the regression stick on things. Right? If we're not exactly sure the risk of a big infrastructure change, we'll just regression test everything. But that's not got value for our customers, right? What we want to drive towards is that when there's changes that aren't visible to your users, their impact should be completely invisible. They don't care which product provider you're on. They don't care if it's better or worse. They don't care about the bill. What they care is that their needs are met. And we see this with this expression. You know what I mean? How many people have used that expression while discussing their software, the bugs they're finding, collaborating with their teams? And what you're really saying when you say those words is that the words I am using may not express accurately what I'm trying, my intentions. So when we focus on the detail, when we get stuck on each individual step in a test, we lose the forest. We lose our customer's perspective. We focus on each individual tree. What we want to do is remember that saying, because how comforting is it when you're trying to say, you know what I mean, and you're struggling with the words and you're trying to get it out, someone says, I got you. I know what you mean. We can move forward on this. I know exactly what you need. That's so comforting. And that's what we want our customers to feel when we upgrade. These are the new features. They're fantastic. But you know what? Everything you came to love about the software before is still working. We still value it. We know it's important to you. You didn't have to say it. We kept it up. We want to maintain the unspoken mutual understanding that is knowing the intent of our software and the customers that are trying to use it. Our next core value is common over complete. So what's complete? Complete is having all parts or elements, lacking nothing, whole, entire, full. This is exactly what everybody thinks testing is. It's what managers expect. There's this idea of the impossibility of complete testing. It's by Ken Kainer. If you haven't heard about it or read about it, I suggest you give it a Google. I can drop a link in Slack afterwards if anybody's interested. But every single time you test, it's slightly different. The state of the server is different. The memory usage is different. Uptime's different. The rate at which you're clicking is different. All those things are different. The inputs you're using are probably slightly different. We can't hope to cover every single permutation. There's not a time in testing where we're not compromising, right? We're always under a deadline for release. So what we're really trying to do is mitigate the most risk in the least amount of time. So if we acknowledge that testing can never be complete, or it's unlikely, or it's unreasonable to expect that, how can regression testing ever be complete? Right? Regression testing is just a part of testing as a whole. There's feature testing, there's regression testing, build verification, all these types of testing. Regression testing is just one fraction of a fraction of what testing is. It can't be complete. But it's not on the onus of understanding that isn't on your stakeholders. It isn't on your customers. It isn't on the product owners. It isn't on your developers. It's on you. So the important thing we want to drive towards is elucidating our actions and their motivations, to be able to explain what we're doing and why, and how we're managing the risk, and that we understand the timeline and we understand its importance, and this is how we're addressing it. So instead, we've got common. Well, what's common? Just satisfying the accustomed criteria, lacking refinement. I kind of feel like this is how a lot of developers see what testers do. It's this unrefined skill. They just do it. There's intuition. They can't tell me exactly why they're doing things. And who as a tester wants to admit that what they're really looking for during this time is just common. It's not refined. It's not complex. So I prefer to think of it as delightfully unrefined, because we were recognizing that there's a holistic nature to testing and releasing software, and that along the way, there's been other phases of testing. And those phases of testing provide us certain assurances. We tested a certain type of testing, did a certain strategy toward addressing those problems at feature time. We are now at release time. We are no longer we don't need to retest the features are still working. We just want to make sure that the common areas are working, that our core scenarios for our customers are working, that we didn't regress, we didn't break things unintentionally. Break as in software breaking, not as in testers breaking software. Testers don't break software. Every time you see that word, a fairy loses its wings. Right? Testers don't break anything. The bugs are there. They're in the nature of software. That idea of breaking software just further pushes us down this road as an antagonist to development. Right? We love software. We love it so much that we don't create it, but we want to make sure that it works well. We want to make sure that it's the best for our customers. We don't get the luxury of that creator relationship with software, the endorphin rush of seeing something that you built re-released. We just want to make sure that it's good. We love it so much that we spend countless hours just looking at it to make sure it's going to be what we want. So what we want to do during regression time is an assessment. Right? Feature testing is the investigation. We dive deep. We go hard. Performance, stress testing, load, that's when you do it. It's feature time. Regression time, we just want to check things are working. We've already been down that road. So take solace and appreciate the work that you did in previous steps. And what this really gets us towards is this communication gap. Because you will be asked, have you tested everything? And if you consent and acknowledge that you are doing complete testing, blame follows. Because you are taking ownership that everything has been covered. Instead, we have strategy. The place for complete is in strategy. And the reason we get that the motivation behind that question is release is always an uncertain time. Right? There's a lot of pressure we need to deliver, but we don't want to be the testers that are holding the bag for quality. We can't do that anymore. We don't assure anything. So what we need to be able to do is have an elevator pitch. And that elevator pitch is a brief description of what your idea is, how you're covering things, in the time it would take from going one floor to the other in an elevator, right? It's a sales technique, right? It's how you get somebody interested. It's a hook. And for testers at regression time, the elevator pitch is about, this is our high-level strategy. This is how a regression test fits into that. These are the test cases or test scenarios that I'm working through. And this is generally where we're at, right? This is how we're managing risk at this phase. This got nothing to do with complete, but this is how this fraction of our work this is how it's being covered. Our next core value is conformity over complexity. So what's complexity? Complexity is the state or quality of being intricate or complicated, and it's the whole made up of complicated or interrelated parts. And this is how testers see testing. Right? When you write when you're going through a test, this is what you're doing. You've got all these pieces going together. You're working through. You're kind of deciding to how you might uncover problems with the software. It's an inherently complex activity. So regression time, if we're now looking to do complex testing, what about all your testing powers? Right? Doesn't it feel great when you uncover the bug because you went through all these steps, or something you knew about it drove you towards that, led you to that change, led you to that test? I'm always a little uncomfortable because many of the bugs I find, they're not necessarily actively what I'm looking for, right? It's my knowledge of the software has driven me to this place, led me to these series of actions. And here's a problem. And I struggle with that. How do I communicate that and not just say, well, I felt like I should test this way? Because all my credibility goes out the window. Right? I'm now this voodoo practitioner. I've got this mindset of quality that enables this, and mindsets are just that. They're just ideas. Right? It's another way to keep us outside of the development process. But it's still great, right? Your teams remember you as like, oh, this person found that bug. Remember that time when you found this bug and you went through this case and this case, and then I told you it wasn't a bug and the developer didn't want to fix it, but the product owner said, well, maybe we should wait. And then we shipped it and it blew up in our face and we had to go back and fix it. That's a little merit badge. It's a little badge of honor that you can wear, show across your team to show, hey, this is how I'm adding value. It's a card you can play in the future, right? This is how, oh, I found that one before, you should listen to me. And those feel great. And it feels wrong to do less than that sometimes. But when it comes to regression, what we're really looking to do is drive quality through stability. We want to provide that sense of certainty for our customers. We don't need to dig into everything super deep. Because over time, what we do is to develop these norms with our customers, right? We want to make sure it's behaving a certain way, or that these steps are satisfied. We want to make sure that's maintained, because it's super uncomfortable, and it's a bigger problem if we're changing things into our customer and they don't expect them. So what we should look for is conformity. And what is conformity then? Conformity is to act in accordance with prevailing standards or customs. It's to bring into harmony or accord. I think this is something we often overlook as testers, but I think it's super valuable. And it gives me kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling to know that I can be that quality influencer, that I can bring our software into accord, that I can have harmony between different or disparate parts of our software that maybe one developer doesn't see, but I get to know. So I can maintain our customers, our expectations. So if we had a new form, it behaves generally the same, even though a different developer worked on it. That's a value. So when we want to regression test, we look for this. We want to make sure those standards are maintained. The hotkeys are generally behaving the same. We're not doing different things. And another way to think about this when you're going to bring advice is, are you a doctor or mechanic? And what's the difference? Well, you trust doctors when they give you advice, right? You don't question their motivations. But when you go to a mechanic to get your car fixed, you're always a little leery. Is this person, what are their motivations behind this decision? Why are they telling me this is wrong? Is it really wrong? Or are they just trying to prove something? Are they trying to, is it a cash grab? Right? So if you think about regression testing like scheduled maintenance, right? Like a checkup, right? You can trust your doctor, right? But it's serious. It's just, we're not looking for major things. Same with the mechanic. We want to get to a place where we can trust what they're doing. We don't question that, because any bug you find during regression is going to draw that same sense of insecurity out. as when the mechanic comes to you and says, I know you just brought it in for an oil change, but you need $6,000 worth of work, or whatever currency you happen to be in right now. Right, because it raises all kinds of uncomfortable questions. Well, why wasn't this found earlier? What made you look at that? Why aren't you focused on what I asked you to do? If we bring up a bug at regression time, why didn't you catch it before? Why wasn't it caught during feature tests? Why did a developer let this slide through? What was the requirements gap that let this happen? And nobody wins in that circumstance. So we don't want our motivations to be questionable, right? We want to focus on building that trust relationship. So we understand at release time what it is we're all looking for. So a way we can do this is to kind of carry forward that metaphor of the mechanic. When you bring your car in for scheduled maintenance, there's a prescribed set of work to be done, but every single dealership or mechanic nowadays has this multi-point inspection. And yeah, it's an opportunity to upsell, but what it really gives is context. It describes why they're looking for the things they're looking for. They're not just ad hoc stomping through the car looking for ways to get money. Right? Here's these standard sets of checks we do. This is the kind of acceptable range of behavior that's allowed in them. And we just, as a courtesy to you, we just checked them all. And this is generally where you lie. This one might need a little attention. This one you should probably take a look at right now. If we set up our regression testing this way, we provide that same context. Right? There's no question about why we're finding the bugs that we're finding or why we're reporting the issues that we're reporting. We've got clear standards about what we expect from our software, each area, each persona. These are the cases. And this is kind of what we're seeing. And we can report that and visualize it to our stakeholders. And they're not going to question our motivations. They're not going to say that person is just trying to get bugs up. They've got a vendetta against this developer. No, we've agreed to these standards. Here they are. Address them or don't address them. But we've satisfied our side of the conversation. Right? So we want clear, measurable guidelines. And as testers, I think the biggest thing we can do is avoid blame, right? Because we don't have the weight on the teams to justify some of our actions sometimes, right? We're always kind of dancing around to try to get influence. And it's getting better. I'm not saying it's not getting better, but we don't have the same stake as developers or product managers because we don't give them the wins, right? We're always reporting the problems. No matter how hard we try, we're always going to be kind of seen that way. So the more we can kind of drive towards understanding up front, the safer we are. Our next core principle here is consistency over correctness. What's correctness? It's the quality or state of being free from error. It's accuracy. Another definition for it is to scold, rebuke, or punish in order to improve. Now, as testers, when we come to a developer and we say, this isn't correct, the first definition is what we see. We want our behavior to be clean. We want high quality stuff. Right? We want our customers to be happy. We want to be happy. We want to be proud of the work we do. But how often do developers cringe when you walk up to their desk? Or they say, oh, what'd you find this time? It's this kind of adversarial, even if it's fun, there's still this adversarial type relationship. And that's that second side of that definition. It's the scold, it's the rebuke, it's the punish. But the thing is, once you've shipped, it doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong. The customers expect that it is. They trust you. That's why they purchase your software. That's why they pay you for services. So it's more important to maintain the status quo than it is to correct things, because if you correct it and the customers notice and they thought you were right before, how does that leave you? What kind of value is there then? How do they perceive your software? So instead, we want to focus on consistency. Consistency is agreement or harmony of parts or features to one another or a whole. This is kind of the holistic approach to our software. This is how our customers' experiences, how things work together. So what we can remember here is there's different sources of truth for different phases of testing. So when we're feature testing, we are benchmarking the behavior, the correctness against your specifications, against oracles, against the product owner, right? There's a time where we can measure things. And is this adequately following our expected behavior? But in regression testing, we benchmark against production. And there might be a bug where we corrected something unintentionally, and that's a breaking change for our customers. You can't just willy-nilly change things on people, even if it's toward a better goal, because sometimes you need to get in front of that conversation. Because consistency is this comfort. I totally want to be this cat all the time. I love my software. I love what I do. I'm happy to upgrade. So one of the stories I always tell with this is, while I was testing at one of my previous jobs, I found a bug while regression testing. Our reporting calculations had been wrong for 5 or so years. I'd been on the job for 4 months. Well, we couldn't just change it. We recognized it, we found the bug, we corrected it, but we couldn't just deploy it. Because we were a data company. How do you explain that your calculations have been wrong for 5 years and your customers have been making business decisions based on that for that same period of time? We need to manage that expectation. We can't just change. We need to be able to communicate. Maybe we need to call the customers and say, this is what we changed. We found this problem. We've adjusted all your backdates, right? But it's just important to remember that as testers, our goal isn't always to make things right. Sometimes it's just to make them consistent. So to summarize our regression testing manifesto, we've come to value behavior over bugs, intent over implementation, conformity over complexity, consistency over correctness, and common over complete testing. And it's not that there's not value on the things on the right, there is, but we just recognize that we value the things on the left more. And I understand that some of this may not be comfortable for everybody, contexts vary, but what I hope this provides is a way to have conversations with your team and to frame your actions and what you're trying to accomplish, and then provide a clear line between what regression testing is and then contrast it with what feature testing is. Because if you can clearly define and understand what you're looking for in regression testing, it also then provides the opposite, a clear understanding of what would then go into regression testing, or excuse me, feature testing. And that's my time. Feel free to connect with me. I am at the Connolly on Twitter or LinkedIn. As Joel mentioned, my blog is brendanconnolly.net. I have long form posts on most of this content for each manifesto topic. So please, I hope this is just the start of a conversation, and I would love to connect and help you any way I can. Thank you.
Brendan, thank you very much for the session. As much as I had read about it and go over your blog, I think that even for me, some points became more apparent, and I'm going to give people some time to other questions, but I do have a couple of my own questions based on your experience. The first one, and I think that you referred to it a little bit. Do you think that we need a similar feature testing / integration testing manifesto to complement this one?
I like the idea. I really do. I worry about as a testing community, sometimes we get caught up in word battles, and it felt a little. It can be challenging to come to terms with or agree on terms that we could all use. I think it's a good thing for teams to have on their own, and if there's ways to help it, it would be great. It's just hard. The context varies so widely sometimes.
No, I agree. I didn't mean about the testing versus checking conflict. I meant like regression versus non-regression, because you put a lot of efforts in saying, hey guys, we're focusing here on the regression part there, where you're basing these tests on previous tests that were run by either the same individuals or the individuals, but at different stages. So my thought here a lot of these times was, well, so maybe we do need to address those assumptions by product and assumptions by people on those stages of our testing.
I agree. I think there's more attention is given though to feature testing with like mnemonics or heuristics that kind of can provide some of that same opportunity and framework for testing. Things like SF Depot or the few hiccups mnemonic, those can kind of give that same idea for what to be looking for while you're feature testing. Regression testing is something we always, the tried and true wisdom you'll always hear is, we'll automate it all. And that's just, in my experience, it's either not an option all the time or it's costly, and the value can be sometimes questionable.
I agree on both those points. My second question comes maybe on more around how would you go about that? And it was when you said that we need to manage the expectations and let other stakeholders understand what are the objectives and the aim, or even the coverage of regression testing. And my problem here, and this is where I'm actually asking you for your experience. When you actually go to product owners, VPRNDs, you name it, whoever on the team, and you say, hey, you know what, we are at the stage of regression testing. And they say, well, with all due respect, I don't care, because after all, they expect testing, quote unquote testing, to be their safety net, their warm, fuzzy feeling, even if you're idealistic. Have you had that experience where you do need to provide that elevator pitch, and how does it work for you on that side?
I have, and it can help. I mean, it's all going to vary by how willing the management team or whoever you're speaking with is open to it. Some people just don't want to hear it, aren't up. They just want to know that it's tested. They're not interested in the details. But I think there's a practical guide to testing in DevOps by Katrina Clokey, and she talks about kind of a testing strategy, a meeting. And I think getting the team together up front to agree on what standards are is extremely important. We're willing to do it with software. We do it with definition of done. If we can do the same thing to get everybody on the same page for what we'll be doing, it really helps those conversations, because then you can go back to, we've had this conversation. I understand you're looking for these, you're not interested in the differences right now, but this is part of it. This is how we're managing. This is how we're addressing your concerns, and we're just using different words. And this is, we can go back to the strategy after release, and we can discuss that if we need to, but it's part of a holistic thing, and it's just helping you make your deadlines.
Excellent answer, and someone already posted a link to the testing in DevOps. Need to repost it on Slack. Brendan, I want to thank you very much. I think that, and people are saying this is a great eye-opener in order to have that discussion with our teams, and thank you for sharing it with us.